another fine session coming up right now with Mandy Kruger as the moderator. Mandy is the independent advisor managing everything Africa. Mandy, great to see you. Is your power back?
No, unfortunately not. So I have to apologize up front. I might disappear halfway through the session.
No problem. But great to have you with us moderating this session. Now, actually, what I'll do, I'll leave it up to you to introduce the speakers, because I'm switching role now from moderator to speaker. Here I am. I'm a speaker. So zip it, James, and please introduce your other speakers. Go for it.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be a part of this great initiative that the MEF has brought together over the next 3 days. I think there are some interesting topics that everyone is very interested in. One of them would be the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is what is the next revolution that's hitting our networks and our economies, and that's the 5G, and what is the impact going to be on messaging, specifically business messaging. I've invited a few of the mobile operators to speak about what will the mobile operators be doing, how will they be looking to gain a bit of the traction around 5G, and what are they looking with regards to the monetization, as well as the opportunities around the 5G networks. So I'm going to invite Kedar from MTN Global to join us. Good morning,
Hi,
Kedar. How are you?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you.
The next one we'll be inviting is Tiago Rocha de Silva from Zain.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
And then we're going to be inviting Ravi Kosuri from imimobile.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Unfortunately, Kiran Riaz from Jazz could not join us, but we've got James joining us. You all know Mr. Connectivity. So James has agreed to help us on this panel today.
Fantastic. I certainly have. I definitely have something to say, and it's nice to be on the receiving end of questioning Mandy. But
so we don't have much time, so I'm going to pretty much kick off. So 5G has been around since around about 2008, and over the next few years, it's going to be expanding worldwide. Not all markets will probably be rolling out 5G immediately. So we've got a mix of mobile operators from not only emerging markets, but also developed markets. And it's going to be interesting to hear what their view is on 5G and how it's going to impact not only the mobile operators, but also the economies of the countries that they are part of. So the first question that we're going to be looking at is pretty much, where do we see A2P and business messaging still playing a role in the 5G era? And I'm going to allow each of the speakers to have pretty much give us some input on that, as well as James. So we can kick off maybe with Tiago.
Sure, no problem, Mandy. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to be part of this session of this panel. Look, I think, first of all, let me just give you a quick overview of what have we been doing in Zain KSA in Saudi Arabia in terms of 5G, right? I think this is the first understanding that we need to give to the audience. So back in beginning of 2019, we start doing a massive deployment of 5G network all across the kingdom. And we cannot forget that Saudi Arabia, it's a massive country, right? So far, after we have launched commercially 5G in end of 19, we have so far almost 5,000 towers spread across the kingdom, and we have covered already 50 cities. So it's a massive deployment, one of the biggest in the world, and definitely the biggest across Middle East and Europe and Africa. So this is where we stand today. Now, I think your question is very, very interesting. Now, before I go there specifically, let me maybe try to demystify one of the topics that also in the previous panel was being discussed, which is what's going to happen to the traditional SMS and how is 5G eventually, or 5G messaging, going to impact it? Look, I think, and maybe we are already seeing it in more mature or more developed markets, SMS is a service that is pretty much not used anymore, right? At least in terms of communication between individuals. It was completely overcome by what we call the OTTs. You know, everyone was afraid 10 years ago, what's going to happen with OTT? They're going to eat the revenue from SMS. That happened. Maybe not yet in emerging markets, but that will happen for sure one day. Now, is 5G going to help the operators to overcome this situation? I think this is a key question. I think what 5G messaging will allow us to do is to do what OTTs were able to do 10 years ago, which is to provide a very good experience for customers to communicate with each other, right? If we look at SMS with all of the information that we have today, it's a very limited service in terms of the experience. We can communicate one-to-one. Communicating with businesses is very difficult. It's basically businesses overloading us with SMSs every single day that are annoying us all the time. And that's why, you know, the interest of customers is no longer there. Now, what 5G will allow us? I think there are two main use cases here that are relevant that 5G business messaging will allow. One is to improve significantly what will be the communication between individuals, one-to-one communication, or even through group chat. Let's say, imagine if we have a sort of an OTT service through SMS. This is what we are looking for in our future with 5G. Right? I think maybe our friends, our OTT friends, now they're getting a bit scared like we did 10 years ago. So how come SMS will allow us to do that? It will with 5G. At least this is our expectation as an MNO, that will allow us to get there. And this, we can go deeper, I think, further on the session, but this is definitely one of the things that we will be able to do. Another thing is you were also mentioning, Mandy, is what about, you know, machine to individual communication, the A2P communication, by using SMS. SMS is an amazing authentication tool that every single business, mobile operators, government institutions have, because they are certain on who is on the other side. Now, every single machine that we will have with 5G, they will be able to know who is on the other side communicating with them, right? Through an automated machine like a chatbot that can help on this communication with a much better experience, not only through text. Imagine we can communicate with voice with a chatbot, that we are in fact communicating to a machine through this chatbot, or not only by writing text, but by actually selecting options that the chatbot can give to us, like turning on the AC or turning on a microwave. These are typical use cases that we can talk about moving forward. So I think definitely 5G and the technology that 5G will bring to messaging will improve, most of all and above everything else, will improve the experience for the customer.
Thank you, Tiago. It's refreshing to hear how the focus has turned back to the customer. And I think a lot of companies, not only mobile operators, but industries out there, are turning their focus to that customer experience and the seamless customer experience, which is something that messaging also brings to the industry. Let's hear from Ravi.
Yeah, that was a very interesting perspective. From my side, we are from IMI Mobile. We are providing cloud communication software and services. So we are not exactly a telco, but we leverage telco connectivity to enable businesses to send out business critical communication. So I want to bring in the perspective of what enterprises think about SMS here, because we interact with SMS enterprises as well as the telcos. So if enterprise comes to a vendor like us and asks for a channel that provides highest reach, no dependency on any device, then SMS is the answer, and high reliability, then the SMS is the answer. So the SMS is here to stay, whether it's going to be 5G or 4G or any network, primarily because of its highest reach as well as reliability and cross-device and cross-operator functionality that it provides. There is a lot of OTT and buzz, and we do offer OTT services as well. But once the initial excitement around OTT has settled, now it is quite clear that the role of OTT is to provide customer care, where it provides chatbots, etc. So the business critical messaging will still be on SMS, whereas the customer care will be on OTT. So both of them have found a niche for themselves, is what I would conclude. So the SMS will be here, and it will be used for all important messages, like when someone does a transaction on a bank, when a bank suspects that there's a fraudulent transaction, or there is an important alert that a user needs to get, the go-to channel is going to be SMS, even if you're going to 5G or any other high-speed networks as well. So that's the value that enterprises are seeing. Another value that enterprises are seeing is using SMS as a channel for marketing, because many of these OTT channels have inherent restrictions, or they've self-imposed restrictions in terms of using OTT for marketing. So as many markets now have a very mature consent regulations, now businesses can send out marketing messages provided they have consent from users. So that's another area that will still remain. The alternatives do exist. Like, for example, businesses can focus on their own branded messaging, but to bring that to scale, it's going to be a lot of effort for the enterprises. So that's the reason why I feel that A2P and P2A messaging, SMS messaging in particular, is here to stay.
Awesome. I think it goes back to the conversation in the previous session with James and with Nick, that there's definitely a home for messaging going forward, and I think it's going to stand the test of time. It's one of the technologies that has survived decades, and I strongly believe that it's not going anywhere. It's just, how do we position those use cases? How do we create new use cases and actually piggyback on the innovative technologies that are being launched? I'm going to hand over to Kedar now from MTN Global, and MTN is doing some great things across all their markets, both developed and emerging. So let's hand over to Kedar.
Thank you so much, Mandy. I hope you guys can hear me. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. I think, look, Mandy, to your question on relevance of SMS and 5G. I think, look, in my view, these are two separate subjects, okay? SMS as a business messaging tool, and primarily for two-factor authentication and interactive communication between a brand and a prospect, will always be relevant. 5G as a technology, and like any mobile network technology, when you go to the next generation, it brings improvements. But the use cases that 5G is based on are different when you talk of SMS, whether it is low latency gaming, whether it is fixed wireless access or what we call mobile broadband, or when we talk of machine to machine, because the whole idea of so many devices and then density of connections increasing, there has got to be a way of creating efficiency in the network. So that's the 5G use case, and we can keep talking about it. But more importantly, because a lot of the audience will relate to 4G. When 4G came, the whole idea was voice everywhere, voice where data, and then instant internet. In reality, the real impact of 4G has been on high definition streaming, or what we call cloud solutions. It doesn't impact voice or SMS, they stay. Brands will continue to use SMS as a two-factor authentication tool, make it more mature by creating some other identity forms before a SMS OTP is sent out. And then if you talk of promotions and marketing, there will obviously be richer forms of communication that will use the underlying technology advancements, whether it is RCS, whether it's WhatsApp for business. These are richer, more expressive forms of messaging, and they will be used by brands when you talk of branding and promotion experience. They, however, will not be used for OTPs. And if you ask somebody who runs an international SMS hub, in 99% of my business is OTPs. And I don't see that business going anywhere. And that's a very, very large portion of what we do at, telecom factories. So to answer your question in simple nutshell, SMS will stay. if not forever, I'm talking of at least 2025. And let me be specific to Africa as a region, because again, look, 5G is in beginner. If you talk of maturity index, it's in beginner stage in Africa. 22, 23 probably into emerging state, and then 2025 and beyond, it will go into what we call progressive stage. Because for 5G to really draw benefits, you got to have fiber to the site, you got to have the handset ecosystem develop, the application ecosystem develop. You can buy a 5G handset today, in whichever countries you are, and then you try, today, because we are not traveling, we don't experience it. But you land up in a country where there is no interop done on the networks for 5G, and your 5G phone is only a good 5G phone to call it. It works on 3G and 4G. That's the reality of the situation. Okay, that's how it works. That's my 2 bits on relevance.
Very valid points. James, is there anything that you would like to add after hearing from the mobile operators?
I would absolutely just like to reinforce Kedar's point. So it all flows, to use Nick's analogy. I'm being cheesy. He wasn't, but I am. But it all flows with his river. And I think I'm going to remember that forever in the world of business messaging. And 5G is like a key which unlocks this magic place. It's a beautiful kingdom, but guess what? It's empty, and it's your job to fill it when it comes to business messaging. But in order to fill it, you've got to make sure the people who are going to be receiving this content actually have access to it. And like Kedar said, unless people have the correct handsets, it means nothing. So, for example, me, I've got a lowly Samsung S7. I love the device. I'm not paid by Samsung, but hey, I absolutely love the phone. But here, on my mobile network in the UK, it does not support 5G. So in order to get 5G, you'd have to upgrade to a more expensive handset, spend several £100, etc., etc., etc. And I'm sure I'm not alone. But the opportunities when it comes to business messaging, because this is what we're here for today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, is absolutely phenomenal. Some of you will remember Minority Report. Remember that movie with Tom Cruise with the pre-crime unit? And I'll never forget him walking through the shopping mall and these 3D ads, holograms and everything popping out at him walking through the shopping mall. This is a good few years old, that movie. I'm thinking, do you know what? That would be really cool if that could happen. But, of course, you don't want to be overloaded with content, which is what Tiago was saying, which can happen with SMS and indeed other channels as well. If you overload people, it's going to turn people off. But for me, it's about unlocking that potential. The reality is with 5G, people, as long as you've got the correct handset, as long as you're in an area where you're not going to be overloaded in a truly dense population, all fighting over that connectivity, be able to get 100 megs per second genuinely on your handset is an absolute game changer for enterprises when it comes to advertising and things like that. So I think it opens up business messaging like nobody's business. But at the end of the day, we've got to temper our enthusiasm and remember, how does this content actually reach the subscriber? And the handset side of things is truly important. And it's that last mile in telecoms. And of course, if you think of internet connectivity, it's exactly the same. These headline rates of so much bandwidth, etc., internet speed, it all comes to nothing if you live more than a certain distance away from the local exchange.
I fully agree with you, James, and I think that comes to the point of how do we position messaging in the 5G ecosystem? So not necessarily driving the 5G ecosystem, but how do we put together propositions that we can go to market with? How do we co-partner within the industries? How do we work with the enterprises to position messaging as part of the innovation that's driving 5G? How do we allow messaging to still be part of those touch points across the user journey and the customer journey for that experience that Tiago was talking to, especially in emerging markets where like Kedar was saying, that 5G is not quite there yet. But how do we start to position and get the customers used to still receiving messages and not just switching over to the OTTs? and into the social messaging. So my next question would be would there be a new business model around the whole business messaging ecosystem within the 5G? And I'm going to open this up to, let's start with Kedar.
Thank you so much, Mandy, again. So look, I think there's a couple of interesting questions from people around, OTPs complying to Payment Services Directive 2, and, the security that OTP SMSs can bring or cannot bring. Now, it's a very important thing to understand. Mobile network operators need to keep SMSs relevant, okay? Now, you look at today's ecosystem, a very valid point. Here in the UAE, after you've taken your second shot of the vaccine, you get a link from the Dubai Health Authority. And you click that link and you're supposed to put in your, what we call residence ID number, or let's say social security number, or whatever is your unique ID in every country, okay? And after you do that, there is a OTP SMS that is sent. Now this OTP SMS, looks like W8YZUV or something like that, okay? Difficult to remember and then put it. But look at the human touch. There is still the relevance of SMS, and those who were actually making that service could have thought about, would it be easy to remember that kind of an OTP and put it back onto the app to actually download the certificate? So that is one aspect where you talk of customer convenience. And the second aspect is, when you talk of SMSs, with all the technology advancements, it is not necessary to only look at SMS as the true OTP, true security mechanism. You could potentially use all the technology advancements to first vet, agnostic to the user, whether the mobile device is James's the device. Once you've made that decision, you can further reinforce that decision by sending the OTP. And then that potentially could not happen in the good old past, but today it can happen. And which is where a whole lot of people are talking about SIM swap detection. So you first detect whether the SIM is the same, then you reinforce it with an OTP. And I think with that kind of a discussion, these questions around payment services directives and whether it is as secure as it is meant to be can be answered very conveniently. And that's my view of the equation. But over to the other panelists and then their thoughts on this.
Yeah, if you allow me, Mandy, I think it's a very interesting point, Kedar, and I have two main comments. One is, if we pay real attention, the main reason why an OTT in the past 5-10 years could not replace completely SMS, it's mainly because of this authentication factor. There is nothing else, no other messaging factor, and unless it's a video conf that has face recognition technology or biometrics with fingerprint, there is no other way than an operator, a government entity, or any business to be sure on who is on the other side. Why? Because the KYC process of a telco is very strong, is very solid, right? Whereas an OTT KYC process isn't. And this is why SMS, at least again in more mature markets like the UAE, is there still. Otherwise, in terms of experience, there is no comparison. Now, what 5G messaging will enable is to give a bit or a lot of this good experience of an OTT to the SMS. So when we can combine experience with the bulletproof authentication factor, I think this can work very well. And one thing more to comment on what you were saying, Jamie, is, in fact, having the last mile, meaning the devices spread it around, it's going to be critical. But obviously, 5G technology, 5G messaging technology will need to enable fallback to the traditional SMS. And that is obviously part of the standards. So there is no discussion about that. But obviously, this will become relevant the more the devices are spread. And today we can already, buy devices with. I'm not going to mention any brands, but you can already buy 5G mid-value smartphone for $200. And this is only after 1 year of the main market start deploying it commercially. So imagine what's going to happen in another year. For sure, we will be able to have $50, $100 5G devices. So I don't see it as a major thing. Of course, it's not going to happen everywhere at the same time. I remember 10 years ago when I was doing a project of deploying the first 4G tower in Africa. I was last year deploying the first 5G tower in Saudi Arabia. So things they happen very fast, right? It took us 10 years to go from 4G to 5G, and for sure it's going to be much faster moving forward. So this just to say what is that when we combine, again, the authentication factor, bulletproof authentication factor that we can have with SMS, with the good experience that OTTs can provide, I think this is going to open a panoply of different and very interesting business cases that telcos will be able also to monetize. I think this was one of the questions you were asking, Mandy.
Yeah.
Telcos will be able to monetize by providing this as a service to other businesses, right? Who is the restaurant or the cleaning company or the Ubers and these companies of the world that don't want to chat in a proper way through SMS, again, the bulletproof authentication factor, with a customer, right? And not through an informal WhatsApp or any other OTT kind of way. I think this can open very interesting business lines for operators, definitely.
Yes,
Yes.
And I think it comes back to one of the questions that is being answered, and then I'm going to hand over to Ravi. But Wahid, in answer to your question, so what other than speed and volume is there value of messaging within 5G? And I think it's not really the 5G network, but it's what we do on the 5G network with messaging. How do we use the 5G network to bring in those authentication messages? How do we use it to bring in, to start to put the flow down the river that Nick was talking about before? How do we start to educate the markets and the industries and the brands on how to use messaging to have that secure channel? Messaging is the trusted channel. So how do we expand on that trust within the 5G era, especially with IoT and a lot of the traditional businesses not knowing how to actually transition into the digital and COVID having fast-tracked them? So how do we start to use messaging initially to help them do that transition and to gain the trust of the industries? And I think the mobile operators are at the forefront of that, where they can actually help and assist because they can drive that trust with the messaging. Ravi, I'm sure you've got a point of view from the enterprise side that you can add to the conversation as well.
Right. So very interesting points. So one is we talked just now about customer experience with messaging and KYC as well. So I have seen, while we are interacting with operators, we have seen operators investing on the surrounding systems around messaging to enable enterprises to build better customer experience around messaging. So that's what we are seeing as a trend that is emerging across from the kind of RFPs that we're getting or kind of interactions that we are having. They're either selecting partners to do that or probably building owning the platforms in-house, but they're trying to build the entire ecosystem that includes systems which check fraud, like the swim swap detection kind of checks, the presence information, the consent information, and easy integrations into upstream, downstream systems to solve some of the user experience challenges that Kedar just mentioned. So this is what telcos are now trying to bring out, a holistic or a complete solution to the enterprises, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, and enable this in the cloud so that they can just log in, do a self-serve, pay for it, and monetize that part of the service. And we are seeing that already happening in some of the with some of the telcos.
Great, James. Any view from you?
I really don't have too much to add, Mandy, given everything that's been mentioned. Because for me, 5G is just the vehicle to fantastic potential user experience. And again, to use Nick's analogy, 5G is the landing vehicle that gets us to Mars safely. It's up to the industry to do with it what it wants. But from my personal perspective, what I will say about mobile operators, and I always stress this, and I've stressed this for so many years, is they have fantastic brand presence and market presence. And there's so much potential to leverage the network. They've spent so much money on developing. And whether they do that themselves when it comes to business messaging or anything like that, or in partnership with a business messaging provider, of which we have approximately 80 or so as members of MEF, then it can only be great. So for me, 5G is the enabler, and it's up to the industry now to do something with it.
I agree fully. So in my view as well, 5G pretty much complements the broader communication ecosystem. And how do we actually start to use it for that end-to-end communication, creating seamless connectivity and experience for customers? The customers know what they want. They don't care what's happening in the background. So how do we position it in a way that it's seamless for any person, whether it's in an emerging country or whether it's in a developed country, and also depending on the handset. So how do we create those seamless connected use cases and customer experiences? Is there any last minute view that you would like to add to the conversation while we have the mobile operators and an enterprise on the call with us?
From myself, nothing, Mandy, although I'm seeing a couple of questions as well, which are possibly related to that.
Okay, so let's see if we can answer some of the questions. So we've got a question here from Jaswinda. SMS still need innovation to survive. Let's get someone to answer that. Kedar, I think MTN is doing a lot of innovation at the moment. They've launched quite a few new innovative apps. So let's start with you.
So look, innovation in any space is welcome. And innovation does not mean you change the technology or product contours. Innovation can be in process. Innovation can be in how we take the service to the market. If you ask me personally, okay, it certainly needs innovation. Innovation in terms of how we deliver those SMSs, how we charge for those SMSs, what is the kind of pricing that we apply on those SMSs. To keep a medium popular, one has to understand the resources that the medium consumes on the network. Sometimes in our overzealousness of looking at how competition is pricing it or making, a lot of money, and in simple words, milking the cow till it goes dry, you try to put SMS prices at 8 cents and 10 cents and 12 cents. It's unrealistic, okay? So if you ask me what MTN is really doing and why the service has become popular is one, total focus on quality, and which means that as telecom operators should, and I'm speaking on behalf of the industry, apologies to those who don't like this statement, we should bill on delivery of the SMS, okay? And we do that at MTN. We do not bill SMSs on submissions, etc. Once the message is delivered on the handheld device, I have done my job of taking that communication from point A to point B. And that's when I invoice for that SMS. Two, in terms of what is the kind of technology we use to deliver that SMS. Now, depending on what you have at hand, you might have a native Citron interface available, or you want to use new age IP interfaces. Depending on what kind of SMS it is. Again, business messaging is not about just a OTP SMS. It could be a transactional SMS, an interactive SMS, the P2A concept that we spoke of, right? Depending on the kind of use case that the message is going to power up, you decide on the technology used underneath it. And you choose what best fits each type of SMS, depending on the attributes that SMS traffic needs. And obviously the third point, which is, how do you talk to your buyers? How do you talk to your customer pool? How do you understand what their dilemmas are? If you can work on these three experiences, pricing, quality, and customer experience, I think that is innovation for me. And that's what me and my team's focus has been through the last 2 years. And that's how we've built the whole SMS business in our setup.
So that's good to know. So what I'm hearing here is you're looking at the job to be done for the customer, and based on that, that is when you decide what innovation is necessary for the delivery channel, and it could be SMS at this stage. Tiago, you're smiling, so we'll go to you next.
Yeah, I think It's interesting to hear Kedar that he has a very transactional point of view, right? The job gets done whenever it is delivered. And typically I like to see always on how is it done? Because, from my experience, a customer is going to stick to you if he likes how is it done. Having it done, it's an hygiene factor. It's a given for him, right? So what is an SMS? The customer never expects that the SMS can fail. I mean, it's not even on his mind that an SMS can fail. It's a given. It's always about how is it delivered and what is the experience that he will have. Going back to our main point of discussion, how can a telco benefit from giving a much better experience providing an SMS that is a native service? And the first thing that when I was, some time ago when I was studying a bit this topic, the first thing that I wanted to know is who is looking at business messaging? And obviously, the big guys like Apple, Google, they already have deployed, and even including with Zain, native SMS, smart SMS solutions with Google RCS, Apple SuiteCom, and Business Chat, that they allow in a smart way customers to communicate with telcos through their native SMS solution. So why can't a telco do the same? And I think this can be a very good opportunity for us to regain control over the customer, or regain control over the experience that is giving through the customer on messaging. Because today telcos, they don't have this control. They don't have any visibility at all, because it's done all through OTTs.
We've unfortunately run out of time. Ravi, would you like to say a few seconds of last words, and then we have to unfortunately.
Yeah, sure. So probably the Tiago has been mentioning about 5G messaging. Probably that will bring a lot of excitement. That's probably the innovation that the end users were looking at, because probably the message has come probably from an end user's point of view. The 5G messaging promises to be quite
more customer focused. I agree, definitely. Thank you so much for the panel that has joined us. Thank you, James, for being a part of the panel as well. I think this is a topic that we can expand on, and it's got a couple of hours of discussions. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for mobile operators, not only to look at how they can remodel their business models, but also look at how they can use the innovation around that 5G is helping to create. And how did we expand that whole mobile messaging and the business messaging offering and get it to flow seamlessly down that river that we've been speaking about? I think that's going to become a hot topic in the next couple of months, is how do we take that river and how do we create it to flow and not dry up? So thank you very much for joining us today, and look forward to touching base with you afterwards.
Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Mandy.